After studying this module, you shall be able to know about the demographic characteristics of the skeleton and learn about various biological characteristics based on age, sex, race and stature. Forensic anthropologists concentrate on human biological characteristics at the population level, with special attention to uncovering the uniqueness that sets one individual apart from all others. This focus on isolating each human being as a unique entity is the essence of forensic anthropology. The practice of forensic anthropology centers on the assessment of every aspect of skeletonized human remains in a medico-legal context for the purpose of establishing identity and, where possible, the cause of death and circumstances surrounding this event. It also encompasses facial image analysis, reconstruction, identification and comparison of both the living and the dead. The forensic anthropologist is most often called upon to assist the law enforcement agencies when decomposition, dismemberment or other grievous injury makes it impossible to recognize a person or use the normal array of techniques such as fingerprints. Beyond murders, war and mass disaster, these specialists are also consulted by governments and individuals to investigate and authenticate the historic and even prehistoric remains and relics. This is due to the fact that a large number of very similar features are shared by the members of any given age, sex, race group or nationality and thus cannot be deemed diagnostic of the identity. General examples include pattern baldness, squared jaw, brown eyes, pug nose and ear protrusion. Population specific features such as alveolar prognathism in blacks, shovel shaped incisors in American Indians and brachycephaly in whites are also not definitive. Hence, biological profiling of the skeletal remains is necessary in terms of demography, age, sex, stature and the race estimation. Now, we will study about the demographic characteristics of the skeleton. Most people would have little difficulty separating a group of normal, unclothed humans by age, sex and race because they have learned to recognize the morphological manifestations of these categories. However, these seemingly simple determinations become much more difficult if one is dealing with a group of defleshed skeletons. All skeleton assessments begin with what Krogman referred to as the Big Four, that is age, sex, race and stature. Each characteristic narrows the pool of possible matches considerably. Sex alone cuts it by half. If a skeleton is complete and undamaged, these attributes can be accessed with greater accuracy. Using the latest techniques, sex can be determined with certainty, age estimated to within about 5 years and stature approximated with a standard deviation of about 1.5 inches or 3.5 centimeters. Assignment to the Caucasoid, Mongoloid or Negroid race group can be accomplished with a high degree of certainty in the absence of admixture. However, forensic anthropologists are more likely to be dealing with the partial fragmented specimens, so they must be prepared to glean as much as information as possible from every bone. Next, we will study about the biological characteristics on the basis of age. During the early years of growth and development, the skeleton undergoes an orderly sequence of changes beginning with the formation and eruption of deciduous teeth and their replacement with the permanent dentition by about the age of 12 years, excluding the third molars. Although the timing of this process varies somewhat by sex, race and health factors, age at death can be estimated to within 1 year in a normal subadult if the appropriate standards are being used. Once the second molars are fully erupted, attention is focused on the skeleton part. The bony skeletal system is not complete at birth, but rather begins with the formation and growth of centers of ossification. With a few exceptions, bones are endochondral in nature, that is, first formed in cartilage, which is gradually replaced by the bone. Until the beginning of adolescence, long bones, for example, consist of a diaphysis, that is the shaft of the bone, and epiphysis, which are the end parts of the bones. These are connected by the cartilaginous metaphysis or the growing regions that are replaced with bone when growth is complete. Because the growth at each bony joint is completed at different ages and in a set order, tracing the progression of epiphyseal union will allow age estimates to within 1 year from about 13 to 18 years. Thus, if a humerus has the distal or the lower epiphysis fused and the proximal or the upper epiphysis open, this indicates an adolescent between 13 and 18 years of age. Age is then pinpointed by determining which joints in the rest of the body have fused, where union is beginning and where all the epiphyses remain completely open. As with dentition, there can be variation by sex, population and health status also. Once growth is complete, the age estimation becomes much more difficult because post-maturity age changes are subtle, irregular and often highly variable from one individual to the next because remodeling rates and patterns are sensitive to a myriad of internal and external factors. Thus, there is a great deal of variation in the aging process itself as well as in how it is reflected in the body. Even among the living, there are always individuals who look much older or younger than their chronological age. It is the same, if not worse, in the skeleton. Since the early 90s, there has been a surge of interest in research on the adult age assessment. Although age cannot be determined with absolute precision even from the fleshed remains, modifications of the existing techniques and, more importantly, the introduction of methods from new skeletal sites have greatly improved the accuracy. Of these, the phase technique from the sternal end of the rib is proving to be most reliable and has withstood the intensive external testing also. It is important to bear in mind that the methods used were designed to yield a high probability age range. Point estimates are neither realistic nor statistically sound. Blind studies have revealed that the rib system is easy to apply with little intra-observer error. Further, research concluded that even though standards were based on the fourth rib, adjoining 3 and 5th were almost always in the same phase. comparisons of the pubic symphysis, the most often used site since the 1920s, and ribs from the same individuals indicated that the rib was twice as likely to reflect age accurately. Photographic rib phase standards can be found in many sources, and rib cast were introduced in the year 1993. Unfortunately, skeletonized forensic cases are not usually complete and undamaged. So, the forensic anthropologist must be able to determine the age at death in as many ways as possible, because the bone of choice is not always to be found. For over 60 years, the pubic symphysis was most often dependent upon the age estimation process. But by the mid 1980s, it became apparent that there were problems with the existing standards, and several modifications of the Todd's original 10 phases were offered. Some of these were designed for seriation dependent analysis of the paleo-demographic assemblages, while the others included the symphysial cast, were specifically created for use on the individual forensic cases. Yet, while it is not difficult to match the bones to the cast, the extremely wide 95% confidence ranges reach an almost meaningless 50+ years. Sushi, that is personal communication, considers the pubic symphysis reliable for individuals under 40, but notes that the utility of this indicator diminishes after the age of 30 or following the completion of the ventral rampart. For cases over 40 years of age, Sushi states that the sternal rib end morphology is the only reliable age indicator. Moreover, the independent test of these symphysial cast along with those from the earlier studies concluded that all of these techniques proved disappointing in their accuracy. Often only a skull is found, and while there are many clues to age, none of them are precise or reliable. The bones of the cranium articulate are jagged lines called sutures that close and may become obliterated with age. However, the progression of the cranial sutures closure is so variable that few practitioners consider them accurate to within 20 years. Although this site was the first chosen for a systematic quantification of aging in the 1920s, it has never been considered reliable. Tooth wear should be considered, but again not as a sole indicator in the modern populations. Age changes can also be detected in the long bones, but only radiographically or histologically. X-rays can reveal alterations in the bone density that reflects the thinning that occurs with advancing age, but not with any degree of exactitude. Changes can also be observed at the cellular level based on the histomorphometric analysis of a cross section of the long bone or rib. Age is calculated from the osteon counts converted in the regression equations. The major drawback of this technique includes the destruction of the bone, time consuming preparation that must be very precise, specialized equipments, and interpretation of a professional experienced in this method. Finally, there is a significant individual variation that can be produced by factors apart from the aging process. Teeth can also be thin sectioned for the age assessment. Several features can be subjected to the regression analysis. Of these, the root transparency was found to be the most important criterion, especially in recent forensic cases. scanning electron microscopy is used to quantify the incremental growth layers in the dental cementum. This approach was originated by the wildlife biologist and was only recently attempted on the humans. Again, these techniques are time consuming, require removal and destruction of teeth, rely on specialized preparation and equipment, and are subjected to considerable variation, especially in the older age ranges. Now we will study about the biological characterization on the basis of sex. In the normal living and still fleshed dead, the sex is a discrete variable. One is clearly either male or female. Differences between the sexes are much less distinct in the skeleton, where both the morphologic and the metric manifestations overlap to form a continuum. There is, for example, no absolute size above which all are male and below which all are female. Again, if the adult skeleton is complete or at least has an intact pelvis, sex can usually be determined with 100% accuracy. Primary sexual characteristics, example the external genitalia, are present in the soft tissue even before birth. But no such definitive marker has yet been observed in the skeleton. Although the sex differences have been quantified in immature skeletons, they remain subtle until secondary sex characteristics begin developing during the adolescence. Attempts at sexing the prepubescent bones have been made by using the measurements of growth-based differences between males and females, but the results are far from definitive. In the adult, the simplest and the most accurate determination of sex can be made by the morphological assessment of the pelvis. The pubic bone and the sciatic notch are wider in females, resulting in an obtuse subpubic angle and more open pelvic inlet so as to facilitate the childbirth process. The male pelvis is narrower and constructed only for support and locomotion. Thorough knowledge of cranial morphology can allow experts to approach 90 to 95% accuracy. However, the observer must be familiar with the population specific variants because the sex linked characteristics vary from one group to another. In general, however, males tend to have rougher bones with larger crest and ridges because these are often the sites of muscular attachment. New research has led to discovery that the mandible alone is nearly as sexually dimorphic as a complete pelvis. In adult males, it has been observed that the posterior ramus has a distinct angulation and the flexor at the level of the occlusal surface of the molars, while females retain the straight juvenile configuration. This figure shows the differences between a male and a female skull with specific characteristics based on the supraorbital ridges and the sharp orbital borders, the pronounced muscle attachment centers, large canines and the chin formation. Quantification of size differentials sometimes allows a reasonable degree of separation of the sexes. Although there are a number of metric techniques from the skull and pelvis, this type of analysis is especially useful in long bones where morphological differences are not obvious. Discriminant function formulae have been calculated from the dimensions of numerous bones and their substructures, but these methods are highly population specific. Even within the three major race groups, Asian Indians are, for example, Caucasoids, but they are significantly shorter and more gracile than the American or European whites. Thus, most Indian males will be metrically misdiagnosed as females if the American standards are used or followed. Interestingly, the overall length of a long bone is usually not as good a discriminator as the head diameter, shaft circumference, or the distal epiphyseal breadth. For many years, skeletal biologists have attempted to find the evidence of childbearing in the pelvis structure. Angel knew that both pregnancy and parturition are associated with the tearing and reattachment of the ligaments on the dorsal surface of the pubic bone. He reasoned that the degree of scarring thus created may be used to estimate the number of births. Houghton in the year 1974 and 1975 and Dunlop in the year 1981 supported this concept and applied it to the pre-auricular sulcus. However, further observations have revealed similar pitting in childless females, leading to the conclusion that other factors may also be responsible for these formations. Now, we will study about the biological characterization on the basis of race. Race may be defined as a rough classificatory mechanism for the biological characteristics. There are three major race groups to which most people may be assigned, that is the Caucasoid, Mongoloid and Negroid. However, there will always be the equivocal cases because of admixture. Moreover, there is a great deal of variation within each group, and skin color is only one aspect of racial classification. Swedes, Italians, Egyptians and Asian Indians look very different but are skeletally white, even though some Indians may have dark brown skin. Finally, even if a skeleton is clearly Caucasoid, there is no skeletal indicator of the soft tissue features such as eye color or hair form. In the skeleton, craniofacial morphology is the best indicator of racial phenotype. A long, low, narrow skull exhibiting the alveolar prognathism, that is the forward protrusion of the jaws, and a wide flat nose with smooth sills is characteristically black. Whites are typified by a high, round or square skull or the orthognathic or straight face and long, narrow, protruding nose with sharp sills. It must be kept in mind that these are archetypal or ideal descriptions and there are many variations within each group and overlap with the others. It also must be emphasized that bones do not give any direct indication of the intensity or shade of the skin color within a race. Furthermore, the color of the bones themselves only reflects what the remains were exposed to since death. Although not as obvious, the racial differences can be found morphologically and metrically in many parts of the body. Whites exhibit noticeable anterior curvature of the femur as compared with the straighter femora of blacks. The pelvis is narrower in blacks, but this is better detected through the measurements. Size differentials reflect disparities in the total body proportions. On the average, blacks have proportionally longer limbs than whites. The reverse holds true for the Mongoloid cases. Like sexual dimorphism, the existence of racial dimorphism has led to the development of discriminant function formulae from measurements of many parts of the skeleton. But these methods are both sex and subpopulation specific. In the final analysis, multiracial admixtures can confound even the best practitioners and not be unequivocally classified by the most modern techniques, simply because the range of normal variation is so great that all possible variants cannot be anticipated. Now we will study about the biological characterization on the basis of stature. Almost every bone contributes to the overall stature of an individual. However, the relative contribution varies greatly. Singularly and collectively, the femur and tibia are the most important components of height. In contrast, a foot bone has very little input. Therefore, the best assessment of height is obtained from the regression formulae derived from the femoral and tibial length. These equations have been calculated for the long bones, even though an arm bone will not be as accurate as one from the leg. It may only be the part found. Attempts have been made to increase the accuracy by using the combined contributions of the multiple bones. Because skeletal biologists and forensic anthropologists are often confronted with the damaged bones, formulae have been devised to estimate the stature from the fragmentary remains. First, the total length of the bone is extrapolated from the fragment. Then that figure is used for the final regression. This extra step adds to the standard error of estimation, but it is better that no estimate at all is done. Body proportions vary by both race and sex. Blacks, for example, have longer limb bones relative to the height than that of the whites. Thus, it is necessary to establish the sex and race in order to use the correct regression formulae for the estimation of stature. The most often used standards are by Trotter in the year 1970 for whites and blacks. Some clues to body build can also be found in the bones since they act as sites of muscle attachment. Prominent crest and ridges and roughness of the bone indicates that a person was muscular at some point during life. Smooth bony surfaces and small muscle origins are characteristic of a gracile or sedentary individual. It is important to keep in mind that although males inherently have more muscle mass than females, so-called wimpy looking males will not have as well developed attachment sites as that of the female bodybuilders. Robustness can be approximated by assessing the diameters or thickness of the bone and their substructures relative to the total length of the bone. All short people do not necessarily have slim builds. Conversely, greater height is not always linked to massiveness. Although the average weight can be approximated for a given height, there is no way to ascertain the obesity from the skeleton. Now students, I will summarize all that we have studied in this module. The forensic anthropologists concentrate on human biological characteristics at the population level with special attention to uncovering the uniqueness that sets one individual apart from the others. The practice of forensic anthropology centers on the assessment of every aspect of skeletonized human remains in a medico-legal context for the purpose of establishing identity and, even where possible, the cause of death and circumstances surrounding that event. Biological profiling of the skeletal remain is necessary in terms of demography, age, sex, stature and race estimation. Age is then pinpointed by determining which joints in the rest of the body have fused, where union is beginning and where all the epiphyses remain completely open. Teeth can also be thin sectioned for the age estimation. In the adult, the simplest and most accurate determination of sex can be made by the morphological assessment of the pelvis. All short people do not necessarily have slim builds. Conversely, great height is not always linked to massiveness.